And welcome to another episode of Experts Speak. I'm Michael DeLon. Today I am talking with Jason Cercone. Jason, thanks for being my guest today.
Michael, thanks a lot for having me on. I'm a huge fan. I'm happy to be here with you today.
It is going to be an exciting conversation because Jason does something that I don't do really, and he approaches it from a different angle, which I love. But he and I both are really big fans of podcasting and how important it is. And the thing, about Jason is we're going to talk today, and Jason, I'm going to have you tell about, who you are and how you got to here, but we're going to talk today not necessarily about having your own podcast, but the value and benefit of being a guest on other podcasts, and how do you make that happen, and why is that valuable for business owners? So before we get into that conversation, Jason, give us a snapshot, man. Who are you? How'd you get to do this?
I've been podcasting since 2015. I had some radio experience back in college, and that was back in the early 2000s, to completely date myself here.
There you go.
But as I explored various career paths, nothing panned out. And when podcasting really started to become popular, I'd say around 2013, 14 was when I started to pay more attention to it. I remember getting my first iPod and it saying podcasts, and me wondering, what is this? What is a podcast? Yep. And then I clicked on it and nothing was there. And I never followed up to find out. And that was several years before I discovered what podcasting truly was. Right. And me and my best friend had kicked around some ideas about starting a podcast and what could we focus on if we do this. Sure. And we never really followed through until at the time, I had a craft beer advocacy blog, and I was helping bars and breweries and different entities do promotions and basically get the word out about events they were holding, things they were doing, beers they were producing. And I had a troll find me and just start tearing down everything I was doing. Okay. And I said, this is odd because typically people enjoy this. Why is this happening? And I went and looked at it. He had a podcast. And I texted my friend. I said, I've got it. We're going to do this. We're going to start a podcast. And we did. And it was not that great because we really put no planning into it. Kind of started it out of spite based on this guy. But as we got into it, I got very, very passionate about the platform. I really fell in love with the process. I loved being able to connect with people that were like-minded. We were having some great conversations, but I knew in my mind I needed to get better at the process. So actually, before I made the decision to step away and learn, I did a couple other podcasts. And then finally just realized if I'm really going to do this, I want to do it right. And I took a year and a half off and studied other podcasters. I studied TV and radio personalities. How are they talking? How are they conversing with others? How did they deliver their message? And that helped me hone my skill set to when I launched another show, things got better. Mm-hmm. And fast forward through the pandemic, I decided that I was going to shift my business primarily to podcast marketing, helping others launch their shows and get them off the ground and do post-production, help them with editing, help them communicate with their guests. And in that time frame, I discovered how valuable the agencies that were getting guests referred our way were. Yes. And got into that space. And from there, learned that people really need some help with understanding the basics on being a high quality, value-driven guest. And what they can truly accomplish from being a value-driven guest is monumental if it's done properly. So that was where I put my attention, and we've been off to the races ever since.
I love it. That's great, because in the picture that just came to my mind is if the local TV station was going to call you, or if they called you and said, Jason, we've got a spot tomorrow morning and you're going to be on for 30 minutes. It would probably freeze you, right? Most business owners would be going, right?
Yeah, right.
Now, podcasting is not quite like that, but you do need some preparation. You need mm-hmm. a framework of what are you going to say mm-hmm. to make it powerful? And then how do you actually go about getting on it? And for my audience, what's the value of being a guest on a podcast if I'm a local financial advisor in Charlotte or an attorney in LA? Why do I need to be on podcasts? Those are the questions I want to ask. So I just asked them.
Well, the value, no matter where you're at in the world, the podcast message can go global. So your authority can be heard by people around the world. Now, depending on where you're at in the world, if you want to attract local business, The value of having a podcast guest marketing campaign in place that allows you to connect with other we'll use the financial advisors as an example.
Sure.
You're connecting with other people in that space and showcasing your expertise and helping them create great content. They produce that content. They do all that back end work for you. So you don't have to do any of the editing. You don't have to assemble the show and find sponsors, all of the necessities that are required to launching a good podcast. You just show up and rock the mic, deliver value, show that you're an expert in the space.
Yeah.
When that message goes out, now you can take that piece of content that someone else produced and share it with your audience.
Absolutely.
Put it on your website, put it on your social media. Let these people hear your voice. And as they listen to you, they're impacted by the value that you've provided. When you do that well, that's going to warm them up to when they call you to take advantage of your services. They're already a warm lead. They've already gotten to know who you are, and they know, based on what you said on this podcast, that you're the answer to their problems. Absolutely. So that's the best way to position yourself. And like I said, it's half the work. You just have to be there to impact them with a good interview, and then let them do all the editing work.
Yep, I love it. And I had this vision of a local, let's say a financial advisor, right, in Charlotte, whatever. On their page, they have podcast page. Now they don't produce a podcast; they're just guests, and they've been a guest on 20 podcasts. Their podcast page is all the people who've interviewed them that any of their prospects could listen to. And every time they do, guess who's the expert? You are.
That's right.
What better way, besides having your own book? What better way to position yourself as the expert? Sorry.
Yeah. No, you're absolutely right. Yeah. And then you have that content to constantly refer back to. So if you talk about a specific topic in the market, like with everything that happened in Ukraine that caused the market to decline.
Sure.
Say you went on a podcast and you talked about that, and something else comes up in the future that's very similar to that. You can always refer back and say, when I was on this podcast, I talked about something very similar. If you want to hear some strategies that I provided, go listen to this show. Then you reshare the link. So you constantly got this piece of content that you can reuse and repurpose. So no matter what happens in the world, you still have something you can refer people to.
That's so good. And we'll talk later about different strategies in your courses and things, because right there, you're a guest on a podcast. You get that back from the host. Now you got a piece of content you can put on your website, you can put on YouTube, you can put on LinkedIn, you can put on Facebook, you can send an email about it, you can put on a blog post. There's 6 or 7 different things you can do with one thing, people. You do that. What if you're a guest once a month, once a week? How aggressive do you want to be, right? So conceptually, being featured, being a guest on a podcast, having that strategy. I love that you said strategy, because I talk about that all the time. This is a marketing strategy to continue to elevate your credibility in the eyes of your audience in a way that really doesn't cost you any money, because you're a guest, right?
That's right. Unless the show has some sort of appearance fee, which is rare.
Right.
This is something that all you need to do is show up with your expertise and provide value to the audience, and give the host good reason to thank you for being a guest on their show, because you're helping them create quality content that's going to help their show grow. Yes. Because the more quality content that's out there, the more people find it, because others are recommending it.
That's right.
You got to go hear Michael on this podcast. He killed it. And then another new listener comes in. And if you get that exponential growth going, the podcaster loves you. What happens when you do that? They invite you back for a second time and a third time. And you become one of those recurring guests, because you're always driven in value, or rooted in value, and driven in what you're delivering in a powerful, impactful way.
Yep. So let's talk about that a little bit more. So if somebody who wants to be a guest on podcast, right, you should, if you were interviewed on 3 or 4 podcasts and you're trying to get on another podcast, you could link them back to your podcast. Say, here are some other places that have interviewed me. What about questions and things? How should somebody, a local business owner or an entrepreneur of any nature, coach, consultant, how should they kind of prepare the podcast host in a way that the interview is a great interview for the host's audience? Because that's really what it's about, right?
Absolutely. The number one way to do it is to lead with value right from the start. And the reason I say it this way is because there are a lot of people that don't. There are a lot of people that just spray and pray and reach out to any podcast within a 10-mile radius and say, I'm a great guest, put me on. As a podcaster myself, when I see something like that come through, I immediately say, why? Why are you a great guest? You've done nothing to sell me. You've done nothing to tell me that you're a valuable resource that I should include in my content catalog. And that's ultimately going to impact my growing audience, because as more people find it, I want consistency across the board.
Right.
So you have to make sure that you're leading with value. And a good way to do that is to find podcasts that are relevant to your space. That's the number one key in this whole strategy. Is if you go on podcasts that aren't relevant to what you do, there's not enough crossover appeal in those audiences to truly impact your results. You're just wasting your time. You might have a couple people, if you go on a, we'll use the financial advisor podcast example again. If you're a financial advisor who goes on a fly fishing podcast, more than likely you're making no impact, because those listeners showed up for fly fishing content.
That's right.
You want to find podcasts that speak about your expertise, so you can go on and make a bigger impact and add value to their overall content catalog.
Right.
So when you find those shows, make sure that you're a good fit, take a listen to some of the content, and find something that really resonates with you. I'm not saying you have to listen to the full episode. You can speed up the episode so you're not spending hours and hours trying to comb through content, but find something that resonates to when you reach out to them, you can tell them, listen, Joe Podcaster, I just listened to episode 54 where you had Bob, financial guy, on the show, and you talked about XYZ. I got to tell you, that really stood out to me. In fact, it stood out so much, I've referred some of my clients to that podcast to listen to, because I talk about this with them all the time. I felt this was valuable information for them to have.
Yep.
Now, if you're the podcaster receiving a correspondence like that, that's going to stand out.
I'm interested. Yeah.
Okay. This person clearly took some time to understand my content. What else do they have to say? And then you can continue by saying, I feel if I were to join you on the show, we could make some valuable content together. Let's talk about blah, 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 and just list off some of your expert topics and what you do on a daily basis. You lead with value right from the start. And when you make that presentation, you're standing out, because like I said, you're going to be mixed in with all those other people that are just spraying and praying, saying, put me on your show. It would be a great time.
That's right. Yeah.
So if you want to truly make an impact, you do that. And if you want to take it a step further, use a service like Loom or Bonjoro. I prefer Bonjoro personally, but send your presentation in that respect. Actually send a video. If you want to stand out, send a quick video message and say, this is why. And you can include a link to a media kit, which we can talk about how to develop one of those. But there's a number of items that I teach, and it's all, if you do it in a succession, it's all part of a machine that helps your overall campaign stand out and ultimately deliver results for you.
Yeah.
You don't just want to go on podcast interviews to talk.
That's
you want it to serve you, and you want it to serve you and your brand for years.
Right.
If you create evergreen content in that type of powerful way, it will, but you have to understand the system that's in place to make it happen.
That's right. And for all of my listeners, Jason just said machine, AKA system. I talk about systems all the time. And what Jason's developed here is a podcast guesting system that will help you continue to elevate your credibility and build it for an evergreen content, so that you're on a podcast in June of this year, you're going to be using that same podcast in June of 2032. Because the content probably is not going to change very much, right? You're the expert, and that's what it's about.
That's right.
Wow. There's so much. So what would be like a first step? Somebody's listening to this going, oh, that's interesting. Because I mean, there are lots of podcasts out there, and I think most small business owners think, okay, I've got to have a podcast. I don't know anything about podcasting. You kind of just cleared the tables that you don't need a podcast. Let's talk about that, and what are some basic first steps that somebody could do to go, okay, wow, where would I go?
Well, being biased, you can come to my website. I have a lot of tips and strategies that I give away for free there.
And that would be what website?
jasoncercone.com.
I love simple websites. And this is all going to be in the show notes too, because, and I love that, because I want people to go and get information and connect with people who are experts at what they do. Jason, you're an expert at helping people with podcast guesting, along with some other things, but that's what we're focusing on today. Jason Cercone.com. That's Cercone, Cercone.com. Just go there. He's got all kinds of great stuff. We'll talk about some other stuff you have, but go there and start listening and learning. And then, all right, so I'm a business owner. I create, let's say, a Word document. what can I talk about? What should I talk about?
Let's go to the basic fundamentals of this whole process. Like you said, Michael, you don't need a podcast, and that sometimes will throw people off. You need to have a podcast in order to work in this space and ultimately get something from it. And that isn't the case. Now, if you want to have a podcast, there are definitely ways to do it. I advise anybody that I talk to, understand up front that there is work involved.
Yes.
This is why a lot of podcasts fade away in such a short period of time. Podcasters or creators get the idea that this is the way to go. I have to have a podcast. I really want to do this. And then they get into it and realize all the work that's involved with producing an episode on a consistent basis. And they say, I don't want to do this as much as I did a few weeks ago. The average podcast fades away after 7 episodes. That's the last statistic I've seen on it. That could have fluctuated in either direction, but still it's not many. You're not going to learn anything in 7 episodes.
Nope.
You're not going to get better at your craft in 7 episodes. But understand up front, if you want to have a podcast, it can be valuable, it can be rewarding, but there is work involved. If you want to focus strictly on the guest side of things, you have to have realistic goals and expectations with that too. Being on the biggest show in existence is not the silver bullet.
Right.
Stop thinking immediately. If you're thinking this now, I'm going to go on Joe Rogan's show at some point and hit a home run, and that's going to solve the puzzle, because it won't. For one, Joe Rogan, very hard to get on his show because he's bringing on celebrities and VIPs and people with clout.
Right.
Also, if you get on his show, you got to hang with him for a few hours talking about whatever he's talking about. So if you ever get the opportunity, I'm not saying don't do it.
Right.
I'm just saying you can't treat it as a silver bullet.
Right.
Finally, if you end up on Joe Rogan's show, the audience is so undefined because so many people listen to that show for varying reasons, because he's got all types of different personalities coming on the show. You're not going to truly get the results that you could get by speaking to a more targeted, defined audience, by talking with a show host who has a very niched down topic and covers exactly what your expertise is all about, because people are showing up for that content.
Yep.
So if you recalibrate your expectations and start thinking on that level, that when I go on a podcast, any show that I'm going to reach out to is in my wheelhouse, it's in my space. When I go on that show, my impact is going to be felt because the audience is showing up for the message that I have to deliver.
Right.
It's going to save you time, and it's ultimately going to serve you in the long run, because the idea and the object of having an impactful interview is that you impact the audience so much that they say, how can I get more from this person?
Exactly.
And then you provide a call to action that brings them to your website. You don't provide a call to action where you rattle off 20 destinations.
Nope.
And that's one of the big lessons that I teach, because a lot of people do this when they wrap up a podcast. When the host says, where can we find you? They say, oh, I'm on Twitter and Instagram and Snapchat and TikTok and YouTube. And here's my website. And here's LinkedIn. Here's my ICQ handle. I'm on AL Instant Messenger sometimes. And you just, at the end, everybody's so beat over the head by paralysis with analysis, they don't take any action.
Right.
They don't go to any of those destinations. Right. So you point them to one specific link on your website, so you get the SEO benefits. Because every time that link is posted from an authoritative website like yours, Michael, or from your host website, that's going to trigger those search engine algorithms to say, this is valuable content that more people need to see. Your interview will help boost your visibility in organic search.
That's right.
And once people get into your ecosystem, your job is to continue providing value in a way that you already do it anyway. Right. I always tell people that your podcast guest interviews are like a trailer to a good movie. When you go to the movies, you check out it's like 35, 40 minutes of trailers now. Yeah. But you get about a 3 to 4 minute snippet of what this movie is all about. And you can decide, this is something I want to see, or maybe this is one that I'll wait for the DVD.
That's right.
But when people get that little sneak preview of who you are, what you do, and how you can help them solve problems via your podcast interviews, they can enter into your world. And then if they're impacted by the value you continue to provide, then they can take the next step when the time is right for them, and they can become a client or spread the word for you.
Well, and that's the other, I'm glad you said that, because podcasting is such a personal thing, just like reading a book. We do it usually one-on-one. I mean, I don't gather my family and say, let's listen to this podcast. Rarely. Right. But when I hear an episode, it's like, man, that's really good. I need to send that to Jason, because we were, Jason and I had lunch the other day and we were talking about, retirement planning or whatever. And I just hear somebody, I'm like, Jason, I'm going to just going to forward that to Jason because it's so simple to forward a podcast on your phone, right? And it's a great way to get referrals because people are learning about you. Now that new person is learning about you, they're like, oh, that's interesting. Let me go check out his website. And it's so much broader. And again, this is happening from an interview that you were a guest on. Why are you a guest? Because you're an expert in your area. Stay in your lane and just share what you have. And it's not a vehicle I have found for selling. I'm not here saying, okay, now go buy my product. No. This is about you providing value for that host and their audience, right?
No one wants to listen to an infomercial.
That's right.
And that's when someone shows up, and it's so funny you bring that up because just yesterday I had an interview on my podcast where this happened. And I consider myself lucky because it's the first time, but I mean, at least on this particular show that I'm doing. But that happens. Sometimes people just can't get themselves out of sales mode and they think that's what they're there to provide info for. It's like, I've got to sell, I've got to get everybody to come over. But what they're not realizing is if you make a true impact, the host is going to sell you and you will never have to. They're going to tell everyone in their audience that you are the expert that they need to refer to because you showed up with value and you help them create content that ultimately is going to help them grow their audience. So they are indebted to you in that respect. The value you provide will also sell for you because again, this is the first step in getting people into your ecosystem. You get them onto your website, you get them invested in what you're doing, and then you continue to provide them value. It only starts with the interview. It doesn't end there.
That's right.
So if you're just a salesperson and you're in sales mode, if no one wants to buy, they're going to tune out the show before it's over, or they're just going to say, well, that was just an infomercial. I have no interest in this person. I'm done. And that's if the interview even sees the light of day.
Right.
Because the podcast host might say, well, I don't want to expose my audience to a sales pitch for 30 minutes. This is going in the trash. And then no one ever hears it anyway. And you just wasted your time again. So don't sell. Do not sell.
Don't ever. Yeah. Thank you for that. And you know, and just right now, you're listening to this, you know, I'm featuring Jason because he's obviously an expert in podcast guesting, right? I'm pointing you to his website. He's not selling anything. He's got stuff at his website for sale. He's a business owner, right? But he's got a lot of free things. He's got valuable downloads. Go check him out because what's happening here, Jason, is a transfer of trust. My audience trusts me, and I have to make sure that my guests are trustworthy. And I can point my audience and say, you're going to have a great experience with Jason. He's going to take care of you. And you're right. And the other cool thing about podcast is 95% of them or 99 are pre-recorded. You know, I've been on a couple live ones, but usually they're pre-recorded so that if you go sell, guess what? That one's not going to see the live day. But don't worry about being so polished that every word has to be just, no, it's a conversation.
Yes.
This is what I love about it. It allows people to get to know you. And I'm sure, Jason, I've been on lots of podcasts, right? Mm-hmm. You've been on lots of podcasts. There are some people who are listening going, oh, I like that guy. Man, I just resonate with him. And there are some other people going, I don't like him at all. That's okay.
Yep. No, you're not. No matter what space, industry, niche you play in, you're not going to please 100% of the people 100% of the time. The sooner you make peace with that, the more successful you'll be because it's going to allow you to keep being yourself and be authentic. If you're trying to put on a show, if you're trying to put this false character, if I got on here and talked super fast and all excited like the old Micro Machine commercial guy, and then I got onto a call with somebody who actually bought into that, and I don't bring that level of excitement, they're going to think I was just lying when I was on the podcast interview where they initially heard me.
Yep.
When I come on a podcast interview, I'm myself, try to add some humor and just make it laid back. But you're right, Michael. It's all about having a valuable conversation. Yep. This is why I love this approach so much. Not only does it allow me to build my brand and connect with great audiences just by having these conversations, but I get to connect with like-minded people like yourself.
Yep.
And it grows my network because now I've got a new person I can, hey, I just was on Michael's show. You got to check him out. And I can talk to him if you want to be a guest. You know what I mean? Like it's people helping people, but you would not have that impression of me if I just showed up and started selling anything I had to sell.
That's right. And one last thing before we go to your website and things is, it's so cool because podcasting is that audio aspect. You communicate so much. I can go to your website, but if you don't have video or audio on your website, it's just, it's bland, right? It's that, okay, well, there you are. And I see you there, but to hear somebody and to get to know them, I can get to know you through a podcast. And like, that's why I love video too. It gets in your Loom video. I'm a big Loom video dude. I mean, I loom everything because it allows me to express myself and connect with my audience and communicate in a way that text just doesn't do it. Emails can't do it. So I love that aspect about podcasting and being a guest. Be yourself, show up real, and let podcasting build your brand and help you reach more and more people. But it has to be a strategy. And I know you've got some tips and downloads and things at your website. Let's talk about that. What are some next steps people can know? They can go to your website, but what can they find there? What should they do?
Best place to go. I mean, I know we talked about jasoncercone.com. I'm going to give you a specific page to go to, jasoncercone.com/expert speak. On that page, you'll find an opt-in form so you can pick up my free guide, 10 tips for becoming a valuable, fully optimized podcast guest. That's really the foundation. And I provide some of the key strategies of what it takes to make a difference as a value-driven podcast guest and to ultimately get results from your campaigns. Because I've talked to people that have said, I've gone on interviews before, but nothing ever happened. And I always ask, what did you do with the interview when it went live? Nothing. What was I supposed to do? Well, okay, there is a process from start to finish, and you have to understand each step and why each step is valuable. Yes. So that guide gets things started. If you really resonate with that information, the next step would be you and I talking about the next steps of the full-on training that I offer through my guest accelerator program.
Right. That's awesome. And I love that because, I tell people all the time, go get the dumb download. Go get it. Learn from him. Yes, you're getting on his list. I get people on my list all the time. There's always that unsubscribe button, right?
Exactly.
Don't worry about it. Get the value. And what you're going to find is that as Jason gives you these 10 things, as you get his emails, you're going to start to know, like, and trust him. His credibility is going to get built, or you're going to bail. We're okay with that. We want to, Jason and I are two peas in the same pot, is we're here to provide great information, okay? We want to help you. We both believe in podcasting, right? We just know that most business owners struggle with it. They don't know how to do it. And what Jason's sharing today, and I appreciate it, is a different approach, a different angle. Is you don't have to have a podcast. You can be a guest, and he's going to help you be a stunning guest that's going to add value to your host and their audience. And that's going to help build your credibility and get you more business. At the end of the day, I tell people, Jason, you should have a profitable podcast. Mm-hmm. What you're saying is you can be a profitable podcast guest when you do it right.
And I'll add this to the equation as well, Michael. If you're starting off as a podcast guest versus starting your own show, mm-hmm. First of all, you're going to get more comfortable on the mic. Yes. You're going to build your brand in that capacity and get yourself out there. But the fundamental aspect that you have to be cognizant of is, how am I making my voice sound better? How am I speaking with confidence and power? And yes. You can get that confidence just by being on more podcast guest appearances. When you do want to start your own show, the number one way to get your audience in place is to be a guest on other podcasts, because it's the easiest way to get somebody to come over to your show, because they're already listening to a podcast. They're on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Amazon, whatever platform they use to listen to their shows. It's much easier when someone hears you on a podcast and they feel like they love you. They're yep. completely impacted by what you have to say, and they want more value. How do I get that? Oh, this person has a podcast. Pull it up, subscribe, and I'm in. I can start binging that content. Right. Versus trying to do it through social media, to where, yes, you want to have somewhat of a presence, but it's more for engagement and conversation, because the majority of people on social media, it's not intentional. They're in a scroll hole.
Yeah.
They're scrolling through reels. They're scrolling through their news feed. And it would have to be the most powerful, gripping piece of content that grabs a hold of them in a couple seconds, that makes them leave that scroll hole, go over to their podcast platform or their podcast app, subscribe to your show, and start listening, because they're already into whatever they're doing at the moment.
Right.
So they might file it away. I'm not saying that no one's going to respond to what you do on social media, but to get someone that's already a converted podcast listener yep. to follow you on your show, guesting is the best way to do it.
Absolutely.
So that's why I always advise leading with this, because you can get so much experience, and then that will translate to how you host your show and ultimately how you build the audience for your show when you decide it's the right time to launch.
That's awesome. And so, Jason, thank you. 10 tips for becoming a valuable and fully optimized podcast guests. It's at his website, jasoncercone.com/experts speak, like the podcast. That was really brilliant of you, by the way. Go get it, check him out, and find out how you can be a guest on podcasts, because it will build your credibility. It will reinforce your expertise, because you're going to share what is on your heart because of the shows you choose to be on. So it's really a great strategy, Jason. I'm so glad that we connected. Thank you for taking some time, sharing with my audience, and bringing it, man. So
I
Jason,
appreciate the opportunity, Michael. It was a lot of fun chatting with you today.
well, you're welcome. jasoncercone.com/expertspeak is where you're going to get it. Thanks for tuning in again, and have a great rest of your week.